under the glittering chandeliers of the Grand Meridian Hotel, where even the flowers probably cost more than a month of her rent. Elena Brooks felt her life begin to crack in silence. She had not come there looking for power or danger. She was only trying to escape the pieces of her past that still followed her. But in one desperate moment, with panic closing around her, she reached for the arm of Roman D'Angelo, the most dangerous man in Manhattan, without knowing what kind of fire she had touched. Most of us know that kind of fear, the urge to grab onto anything when life starts falling apart. When Roman looked down at her and smiled, two worlds that should never have met crashed together. The ballroom rose 3 stories high, all cold marble, glass and polished wealth. It reflected the perfect faces of New York's elite, while gloved waiters moved through the crowd like ghosts. Elena stood near the edge of it all, clutching a modest wedding gift as if it could protect her. Her navy dress, bought on sale 2 years earlier, looked painfully simple beside the silk and diamonds around her. She had come out of loyalty to Marissa, her old roommate from the days of cheap meals, overdue rent, and shared dreams. But that girl seemed gone now, replaced by a flawless bride who felt like a stranger. Elena only wanted to leave before anyone noticed she did not belong. She should have walked out 10 minutes earlier. But fear has a way of freezing your feet right before the storm hits. Then a voice cut through the music. Elena. She turned slowly and found Derek Hale standing there with a glass of champagne and the same smug arrogance he had worn 18 months ago. The night he discarded her because she was not enough for the life he wanted. His thin smile carried a cruel question he did not need to say out loud. How had someone like her managed to get inside? Elena tried to gather her dignity and said she was Marissa's old friend. Derek's eyes traveled over her dress, and the quiet judgment in his gaze made her skin burn. Derek asked if she was still pouring coffee at that little shop, saying it as if her quiet life were some failure she had not been smart enough to escape. Before she could answer, a beautiful blonde in a silver gown slipped beside him and curled around his arm like a prize. When the woman asked who Elena was, Derek erased 2 years of history in one easy sentence. Just an old friend, he said. It is a bitter thing when someone who once promised you a future suddenly reduces you to a footnote. Elena clenched her fists, humiliated and furious. She murmured something about an early shift and needing to leave, but Derek only laughed under his breath, chipping away at what little pride she had left. He told her she should stay and enjoy herself, his voice sweet with mockery. Tears stung Elena's eyes as she turned to escape, but his parting words followed her. He said she looked exactly the same, a polished insult meant to tell her she had stayed small while he had moved on. Around them, people began to whisper. Elena could feel every glance like a needle against her skin, desperate for any hand to hold in a room that suddenly felt ready to swallow her. Her eyes found a lone man standing by the high-arched windows. He was removed from the laughter, the champagne, and the vanity around him, as if none of it had the power to touch him. The stranger was not watching the party. He was staring out at the lights of Manhattan as if they meant nothing to him. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with sharp features and the stillness of a man who belonged everywhere and nowhere at once. His charcoal suit was perfect, but it was not the suit that made people step around him with care. It was the weight of him, the quiet authority that made the glittering crowd seem small, driven by the instinct of someone drowning. Elena crossed the marble floor in 10 quick strides. Her heels tapped like a countdown, without giving herself time to think. She reached out and touched the fine wool of his sleeve. The moment her fingers touched him, his whole body went still. Please, Elena whispered, her voice breaking. I just need you to pretend you know me for 2 minutes. He turned his head slowly. His eyes were dark, unreadable, and old in a way that had nothing to do with age. He looked to be in his mid-30s, with a hard jaw and a face that gave away nothing. His gaze dropped to her hand on his sleeve, then to her trembling mouth, as if he were deciding whether she was worth the interruption. Sometimes mercy comes from the last place we expect it, and in that moment, Elena had no better place left to look. His silence was not warm, but it was permission. Who are we hiding from? He asked, his voice low enough to make the noise around them fade. My ex, she whispered, just as Derek and the blonde woman began walking toward them. The stranger glanced at Derek with the detached disgust of someone noticing dirt on a clean floor. How do you want to play this? He asked. Old friend. Business partner. Elena's mind went blank. I didn't think that far. Then think fast. He murmured. He's here. When Derek stopped 2 feet away. His smug expression faltered beneath the shadow of the man beside her. Derek muttered that he had not realized she had come with someone. Elena forced herself to stand straighter and said that she had. As Derek took a better look at the man beside her, a flicker of fear crossed his face. He tried to introduce himself, but the stranger let the silence stretch until Derek began to sweat. At last he extended his hand and said one word. Roman. Derek hesitated before shaking it, then claimed to be an old friend. Roman did not believe him, and he clearly did not care. He ignored the blonde woman entirely. When Derek asked how they had met, Roman looked back at Elena, and for one awful second she thought he might expose the lie. This was the exact moment where desperation collided with dangerous destiny. Elena had cornered herself badly enough to beg a stranger for protection. Instead of turning away, Roman smiled. It was a cold smile, empty of comfort, but it did what it needed to do. We met through mutual friends a few months ago, he said smoothly. Elena nodded, her heart pounding so hard she could barely breathe. Derek looked miserable, his clean victory ruined. Then Roman placed his hand at the small of her back, a firm, possessive touch that sent a jolt through her. We arrived late, Roman added, his tone final. Vanessa quickly pulled Derek away, leaving Elena alone with the man she had chosen out of pure panic. Derek walked away, but he looked back once, confused and suddenly regretful. People often notice the value of what they lost only when someone else is standing beside it. When he disappeared into the crowd, Elena finally exhaled. Her whole body was shaking. She whispered an apology and said she would leave Roman in peace. But when she tried to step away, his hand remained at her back. Stay, he said quietly. Elena froze. If you run now, he will know it was a performance. He nodded toward the far side of the room, where Derek was still watching them. He was right. Elena swallowed her fear and let Roman guide her toward a darker corner of the ballroom. They stopped near a quiet table, draped in white linen and scattered with dying rose petals. There was something strangely comforting about standing next to someone who expected nothing from her. You did not have to do that, Elena said over the music. No, Roman replied. I did not. It was not kindness exactly, and it was not pity. It was simply true. When she asked why he had helped her, his eyes stayed distant. You looked like you needed it. The honesty of it made her chest ache. She admitted that she had, and for a while they stood together in the noise. She watched him and understood that he did not belong in that room. He belonged somewhere darker. When Elena asked whether he knew the bride, she was trying to reach past his walls. His answer was flat. He was there on business. Yet his silence did not feel like a threat so much as a fortress. The scent of cedar and cold ash drifted from his suit as she asked for his full name. When he murmured D'Angelo, the air seemed to change. It was a name people whispered behind closed doors. The name of a shadow king whose empire was built on construction contracts, influence, and fear. Elena felt the blood drain from her face. She had not borrowed a stranger for a lie. She had dragged a legend into the smallest, ugliest corner of her life. To speak the name D'Angelo was to summon a modern ghost story. Elena realized with sudden horror that she had pulled a legendary underworld figure into her humiliation. Roman watched her reaction without surprise. When she admitted she had not known who he was, he asked, calmly and almost clinically, whether she was going to run. Human nature is strange that way. Sometimes we are drawn toward the very flame that could burn us. Derek was still watching from across the room, and Roman's quiet strength made her feel grounded in a way she had not expected. No, she whispered. Good, he said, studying her as if she were a puzzle he had not solved yet. Roman suggested they leave the ballroom for a private lounge on the 14th floor. Elena looked around at the wealthy guests and felt suddenly tired of all the polished lies. Beside her stood a dangerous man who had protected her without asking for anything in return. Sometimes the most honest shelter is found far away from respectable rooms. She agreed. Roman did not touch her again. He simply turned, certain she would follow. They rode the elevator up to a quiet space of dark leather, dim amber light, and heavy silence. In a secluded booth beyond the reach of judgment, Elena finally let herself breathe, though her hands still would not stop trembling. Sitting across from him, Elena felt her pulse beating in her throat. A waiter arrived quickly, clearly aware of who occupied the booth. Elena ordered red wine and used the glass to hide her nerves. When she asked why Roman had come to the wedding, he offered only fragments. He spoke, he said, only when there was something worth saying. Then he leaned back and fixed his gaze on hers. You already made your point to your ex. He said, why stay? Elena did not have a clean answer. She only knew that for the first time that night, someone had looked at her without pity, contempt, or amusement. That alone was enough to keep her seated. She admitted that Roman had been the first person that night who had not treated her like an outsider. Surprise flickered across his face before he answered with brutal honesty. She did not belong in that ballroom because she was better than those people, and better than her ex. The words were too sharp to be flattery, and that made them harder to ignore. They drank in silence for a while, when Elena challenged him, saying he did not know her at all. Roman pointed out that she had chosen a dangerous stranger instead of facing her past, and she had not run even after hearing his name. When she wondered if that made her foolish, he said softly, foolish people run from me. You stayed. Elena set her glass down with care. Should I be running? Roman gave a small, melancholy smile. Probably, but his voice carried something quieter beneath the warning. Something that almost asked her not to. Looking at him closely, Elena did not see a monster. She saw a tired man who had forgotten how to trust. When she asked again why he had helped her, he said it was because she needed help. She shook her head. That was not enough. Why didn't you just walk away? Roman fell silent, then leaned forward, his gaze holding hers with unnerving intensity. For the first time that night, she felt he might actually give her the truth. He said she had reminded him what courage looked like when someone's knees were shaking. The admission settled between them. Elena whispered that she had not been brave, only desperate. Roman seemed to understand that the two are often closer than we think. She looked at this man with all his power and wondered how he could possibly know anything about fear. Then he asked about Derek, and the calmness of his voice carried a dangerous offer beneath it. Elena understood at once and refused, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had wanted a shield, not a weapon. But sitting across from Roman, she was starting to understand that he did not know how to be only one of those things. She took a slow sip of wine to steady her hands and dismissed Derek as a mistake. Roman saw through it. They had been apart for 18 months. But the 2 years she had spent with him still lived in her body. Looking down at the red wine in her glass, Elena admitted that Derek had made her feel small, as if she were only a temporary placeholder in his life. The worst part was that she had believed him. Roman's jaw tightened with quiet fury. He called Derek an idiot, when Elena murmured that he did not even know her. Roman looked straight into her eyes and said, I know you are a survivor. The words broke something open in her. Anyone who has spent years feeling invisible knows how powerful it is to be seen, even for a moment. Elena whispered her thanks. Roman drained his whiskey and asked her to tell him something real. He wanted to know the woman behind the performance, the one who was not simply reacting to old wounds. His curiosity was sudden, but it disarmed her. Slowly she began telling him about her ordinary life, the early shift at a cafe on Amsterdam Avenue, the steam, the pastries, the impatient strangers shouting morning orders. It sounded small compared to his world, but Roman listened as if every word mattered. That made it harder for her to hide. When he asked whether she enjoyed the work, she tried to shrug it off. Roman pressed for the truth. No one had asked her what she wanted in a very long time. Derek had mocked her ambitions. Her parents had cared only about security. Friends had drifted away. Finally, she admitted the thing she rarely said aloud. She wanted to write stories that made people feel something. When Roman asked why she had stopped, she told him the painful truth. She had let a cruel voice convince her she was not good enough. Derek had stolen her confidence, and she had carried that lie for years. Roman looked at her with absolute certainty and told her Derek was wrong. He said her eyes changed whenever she spoke about writing, and that kind of passion could not be faked. If it is that real, he murmured, it is worth fighting for. Elena looked down quickly, fighting tears. She asked what Roman did outside of work, hoping to turn the attention away from herself. He admitted, with a quiet honesty that felt almost devastating, that work was his entire life. When she called that lonely, the word settled between them. He had no real friends, only employees. In the silence that followed, both of them understood they had revealed too much. Too quickly. Elena knew it was time to leave, before the night became something neither of them could explain. When she told him she lived near the park on the Upper West Side, he immediately offered to arrange a ride. She tried to refuse, but the rare softness in his voice stopped her. She was too exhausted to fight, and the thought of sitting alone in a yellow cab, replaying the impossible evening, felt unbearable. She accepted. They rode the elevator down in heavy silence and stepped out to a waiting black sedan. Standing beside the open door, Elena understood that they were about to return to their separate worlds. As she thanked him and moved to get in, Roman's low voice cut through the cold air. If she ever needed him to play protector again, she only had to ask. His parting words were framed like a joke, but the weight in his tone made her chest tighten. Elena promised she would remember, then slipped into the car. The door closed, shutting out the noise of the city. Through the dark glass, she watched Roman's lonely figure fade into the Manhattan shadows. It is strange how often we run from the very things that will change us. For 3 days, silence stretched between them. Elena convinced herself that a man like Roman would forget a simple barista by morning. But on Thursday afternoon, while she was cleaning sticky tables at the cafe, her phone vibrated with a message from an unfamiliar number. A single question on a glowing screen can undo every defense we thought we had built. The message asked if she was free on Saturday. Elena froze, dish soap dripping from her hands onto the worn wooden floor. She hid her trembling fingers from her coworker and waited until she was on the crowded subway to ask who it was. The reply came back as one word. Roman. He said she had been easy to find. A casual display of power that should have alarmed her. Instead, a small smile touched her lips. Sometimes danger does not arrive with a warning siren. Sometimes it arrives as the first thing in weeks that makes you feel awake. Her soft laugh disappeared beneath the screech of the train. In the dark subway window, her reflection looked uncertain and flushed. She asked what he had planned. His answer was simple. Dinner for Elena. A public place meant judgment, watching eyes, and the pressure to perform. So the location mattered. When Roman promised a quiet, private place where no one would stare, something in her shifted. He had remembered her fear of being seen. Attentiveness, she realized, could be a quiet form of devotion. At 7 o'clock, she decided to take the risk. The sensible part of her called it reckless. The lonely part of her had already said yes. Anticipation can stretch time until every minute feels sharp. For Elena, the waiting ended at 7 on Saturday, when a sleek black town car pulled to the curb. She had spent 2 hours trying on different versions of herself, before finally choosing a dark green dress, soft armor for an uncertain night. When she slid into the leather seat, Roman's gaze met hers, steady and intense. He noticed her shaking hands immediately, when she admitted she was nervous and confused. He offered a quiet understanding that only made him more difficult to read. They drove to a hidden corner of Brooklyn, to a restaurant where power did not need to announce itself. The staff's silent obedience told her enough. When Elena asked whether he owned the place, Roman only gave a faint, unreadable shrug. She looked down at the menu, but the words blurred. Her attention kept returning to him. The scars across his hands against the white linen, the sharpness of his eyes, the way the rest of the room seemed to fall away around him. He told her to order anything, testing him. She asked what he would do if she chose the most expensive dish. He smiled and said he would know she was testing him. After they ordered, he dismissed the waiter in smooth, native Italian. Then the polite surface between them fell away, and his gaze asked for honesty. It was the same request he had made the night they met, only quieter now. "I have been thinking about you," Elena said before she could stop herself. Roman went still. When he questioned her, she admitted that he was not the heartless monster she had expected. He did not deny being a monster to others. But with her, he said, the rules seemed different. To most people, he was useful only for what they could get from him. She had only asked for 2 minutes and had been prepared to walk away. Realizing how easily they could have missed each other, they sat in a fragile peace as the food arrived. Dinner was extraordinary. Under Roman's rare, softened gaze, warmth crept up Elena's neck. She joked about her boss and laughed at how far this elegant room was from the greasy cafe where she worked. The wine loosened her tongue, and soon she was telling him about her tiny studio apartment and the demanding customers who filled her mornings. Roman listened with a stillness that felt almost protective. But the warmth vanished when she gently asked about his family. His posture tightened. He admitted his choices had cut those ties. When she pressed, his answer was simple and sad. He protected the people he loved by keeping them blind to the dark reality of his life. The loneliness of it settled over the table. Elena put down her fork, suddenly struck by how isolated he truly was. Acting on instinct, she reached across the table and brushed her fingertips over the scars on his hand. It was a small offering of contact. Roman flinched. For a second, he seemed torn between taking her hand and pulling away. Then he changed the subject and asked about her writing. Elena deflated. She admitted her journals were full of fragments, abandoned ideas, and old hopes she no longer trusted. Roman did not comfort her with empty praise. He told her plainly that fear had become her excuse not to try. He asked if she thought he had never feared ruin. He had built his empire from blood, dust, and impossible choices. In a world where one wrong move could mean death, still he chose motion over decay. When Elena said his power protected him, he corrected her. It was not respect that followed him. It was fear. He told her she had a quiet resilience she refused to recognize. Elena fell silent, fighting Derek's old voice, the one that had spent years carving away her self-worth. When she asked why a man like him cared about her words, Roman's answer was raw. He was surrounded by people who wanted something. Her voice was the only thing around him that did not come with a price. There are few things more disarming than being seen beneath your armor. When Roman admitted that she saw him as a person, not a weapon, Elena's throat tightened. He left a generous tip without glancing at the bill and asked her to walk with him instead of riding. They moved together past quiet brick townhouses and a bright corner store where an old man watched the night pass by. Roman's black car trailed slowly behind them, but he stayed on the pavement beside her. He confessed that he had not walked like this in years. The admission was small, almost ordinary, and somehow more intimate than anything he had said at dinner. To exist without strategy was a luxury Roman had forgotten. When Elena asked what he had planned for the rest of the evening, he stopped in the empty street. He said he had no plan, and the emptiness frightened him. He did not know how to be near her without trying to control the outcome. That rare vulnerability broke through Elena's remaining defenses. She stepped closer and told him they could figure out the silence together. Roman warned her that he was violent, that she deserved something gentler. Elena gave him her truth. She wanted him, scars and all. It was not a perfect confession. It was messy, reckless, and honest enough to change everything between them. Her confession hung in the freezing air like a spark. Roman traced her jaw and whispered that she did not understand what she was saying. But Elena did. She rose on her toes and kissed him first. The kiss was clumsy and sudden, and Roman froze in shock before his resistance collapsed. His fingers tangled in her dark hair, and he kissed her with a kind of reverence, as if afraid she might break. When they pulled apart, he murmured that they needed to stop before he destroyed something pure. But his arm stayed around her, holding her like an anchor in rough water. Her phone vibrated in her bag, and for one foolish second, she ignored it. The phone would not stop. At last, Elena pulled away and saw Maya's name. 3 missed calls and frantic messages demanding she answer. Maya picked up on the first ring, her voice tight with panic. Derek had come to the cafe, demanding information, asking invasive questions, and frightening the staff. He had not just asked where Elena was. He had waited near the back door, watched Maya lock up, and left only when she threatened to call the police. Elena's blood went cold. Roman's focus sharpened instantly, like a predator turning toward a threat. Derek claimed he only wanted to talk, but Maya said something about him felt wrong. Elena hung up and told Roman everything. Roman's face became still and dangerous. He understood men like Derek. They did not want conversation. They wanted control. Elena refused to let Roman handle it for her. She needed to reclaim her own power, even if she was afraid. When Roman offered his kind of help, she asked for his trust instead. For a man like him, stepping back took real effort. He agreed on one condition. If Derek came near her again, she would tell him. They returned to the car in heavy silence. Sometimes the hardest part of loving someone is holding back your own strength so they can learn they are strong enough to survive. Roman did not like it, but for her he tried. Inside the dark car, they sat with the city blurring past them, their legs nearly touching. At her apartment building, Roman walked her to the entrance. He paused there, as if fighting a flood of words. But in the end he only nodded and stepped back into the shadows. Only after the door clicked shut did Elena breathe. Her phone vibrated with a message from him, telling her to lock the door and stay safe. A soft smile touched her mouth as she replied that she already had. That night, she fell asleep, wrapped in the memory of his touch and the warmth of his kiss. For once she felt valued. For once the dark outside her window did not feel quite so empty. A new love can blur reality very quickly. For 2 weeks, Elena and Roman lived in a strange suspended world, their days marked by quiet phone calls and hidden restaurant booths. She learned him in pieces. He grew up in Queens, drank his coffee black, and loved the rain. Then, in a small bookstore, a deeper pattern revealed itself. She asked why all his books were about fallen empires. He said he studied ruins so he would not repeat their mistakes. Elena understood the answer, but it still made her sad. Life's real tragedy was not that things ended. It was the fear that stopped people from building anything beautiful before the ending came. Roman closed his heavy history book and challenged her to offer a better view of the world. Elena slid a worn love story across the table. He dismissed it at once as escapism. She told him fiction was not about facts. It was a safe place to feel the things we were too frightened to face in real life. Something in that answer cracked open his defenses. When he asked what she feared, she told the truth she had been avoiding. She was terrified of letting him get close. Roman reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, leaving longing in the space between them. Neither of them moved for a breath too long. His own defenses fell. He whispered that he was afraid of ruining something pure, of leaving her heart broken because of what he was. Elena leaned into his touch, offering him a silent promise to face the cold with him. He kissed her with desperate tenderness as rain began tapping steadily against the glass. He held her as if she were precious and breakable. Then his phone vibrated, and the warmth disappeared. His face hardened into a mask. He said he had to go. They walked into the rain, where his car waited with the engine running. He told her to be safe, but his eyes carried the weight of a secret. Loving Roman meant accepting that some doors in his life were still locked. He disappeared into the back seat, leaving Elena to watch the red taillights bleed into the wet street. Only then did the weight of her choice truly settle. Roman did not simply have a demanding career. He lived on a wire stretched over an abyss she could not see. Back in her room, her writing stayed frozen. Her thoughts belonged to him. Then at 2 a.m, her phone cut through the silence. Roman's voice sounded hollow and drained. He told her only that he was safe. When she asked where he was, he asked if he could come over. 15 minutes later, he stood at her door, his expensive suit rumpled, looking less like a king and more like a man who had nowhere else to go. In that midnight hour, with rain tapping the glass, Elena did not demand explanations. She led him to the couch, and he let himself collapse. His armor fell away in the quiet of her small studio. He rested his head against her shoulder while she ran her fingers through his hair. Far from the cold streets and whatever violence had followed him, his breathing began to slow. In that stillness, Elena understood a dangerous truth. She was falling for a man who lived on the edge of a blade. It was terrifying, but it also made her feel alive. She did not know whether that made her brave or foolish. She only knew she did not want him to leave. A few nights later, Roman brought her into his world. She stood in his Tribeca penthouse, high above the city, with the Hudson River below like a dark ribbon. It felt unreal, as if she had stepped into a film and forgotten her lines. Elena tried to wear a calm expression, but Roman saw through it. He knew her silence came from fear, not fatigue. On the leather couch, his fingers found hers, urging her to speak. She wanted to tell him how frightened she was of the depth of her own feelings, but the words caught in her throat. Too often, we stay silent when we most need to speak, and the silence becomes another wall. Truth can be heavy when we are not ready to carry it. Roman looked at Elena with eyes that had seen too much and explained the terms of his life. His world was built on compromised choices, stained by things that did not wash away. He wanted her safe, and to him, safety meant keeping her blind. But darkness is not protection. It is another kind of prison. Elena pulled her hand away as the warmth between them cooled. She walked to the window and stared out at the city lights. She told him she could not live in a locked vault. Roman came up behind her and said he was only trying to protect her from his demons. Elena turned to face him, anger bright in her eyes. Why did powerful men always assume the women they loved were made of glass? She was not fragile. She did not want to be sheltered from the storm. She wanted to stand beside him in it. She wanted all of his life. Not only the clean chapters he decided she could handle. Roman dragged a hand through his hair, anxiety tightening his posture. When he spoke, his voice seemed to come from far away. He said there were things he had done that would make her run if she ever knew them. Elena heard the warning, but she also heard the fear beneath it. The confession hung in the room like smoke. Roman had built his empire on choices that would make ordinary people recoil. And the hardest part was that he would make those choices again if survival demanded it. Elena did not turn away. She stepped closer and asked not for innocence, but for access to his locked heart. Love did not require a spotless past. It required honesty. Even when the truth was ugly, Roman closed his eyes and admitted he did not know how to begin letting someone in. But when his arms closed around her, the tightness of his embrace told her he was ready to try. It was not a promise of safety. It was something more fragile, a promise not to hide. He apologized against her hair, blaming himself for not knowing how to love someone properly. Elena gave a soft, bittersweet laugh. Then Roman surprised her by asking her to come with him to Chicago. When she hesitated and mentioned her job, he offered to cover whatever money she would lose. The offer was generous, but it also made her pull back. True devotion could not be bought, and trust was not a transaction. Roman felt the shift and framed her face in his hands. This time, his voice was stripped bare. He did not want her there to save her. He wanted her there because he needed her near him. That simple confession broke through her last defense. She wanted to say yes, but the practical part of her still searched for boundaries. What would she be in his world while he conducted business she was not allowed to understand? Roman searched for the right words and finally admitted that he simply wanted her close. He wanted the comfort of knowing she was in the same room. Seeing this powerful man without his usual armor made Elena's hesitation crumble. The next morning, she was on a private jet, sipping coffee from porcelain instead of a paper cup. Roman worked intensely on his computer while she watched him and realized how quickly her quiet life had been pulled into the center of his storm. Without looking up, he said, "You are staring." Elena tried to keep the mood light and called it a scientific study of a rare subject. She pointed out his small anxious habits, the tightness in his jaw, the furrow in his brow, the endless coffee. She could read him too easily, and it unsettled him. When he finally closed the computer and met her eyes, His voice carried a warning. The more she understood him, the harder it would be for him to hide what he was. His bluntness chilled her, reminding her of the fortress around his heart. He could sit beside her at 30,000 feet and still keep the most dangerous parts of himself locked away. He still wanted to keep her separate from his mistakes, convinced that a glass wall would save her from the flames. Elena pushed back. She refused to live like a treasured possession, locked in a beautiful cage. You cannot truly love someone while denying them the right to choose what they are willing to face. Real connection is not hiding behind someone else's shield. It is standing beside them in the rain. Roman claimed he trusted her, but the distance between his words and his actions filled the cabin. High above the clouds, they were flying, yet they had never been closer to falling. Elena felt the shift and knew this argument would not end with a soft answer. Elena said into the heavy quiet, "Stop shutting me out." Roman turned away, his jaw tight with a burden he did not want to share. He described Chicago not as a trip, but as a war zone. There were people there who did not bargain, people who rewrote survival through violence. He begged her to run if the danger came too close, to fly back home and never look back. Elena refused. Love can be stubborn that way. She would not leave him alone in the dark. Their fingers locked, and a fragile truth settled between them. Sometimes people would rather burn together than survive untouched and alone. He whispered, the warning almost a plea. Find someone normal. But Elena had no desire for ordinary if ordinary meant cold and empty. When they landed in Chicago, the luxury of the hotel suite only made her feel more uneasy. Roman left at 6, promising to return by 10. As the hours stretched on, the silence grew hostile. An empty room can be cruel to a worried mind. By midnight, every call went straight to voicemail, and her thoughts spiraled. She imagined him cornered in some wet alley, trapped somewhere beyond help. Fear grows teeth in the dark. Waiting, she discovered, can be its own kind of torture. At 1 a.m, the lock turned. Roman stepped inside carrying the weight of a man who had survived a quiet war. He was worn down, but intact. Elena rushed into his arms and buried her face against his chest, trying to calm her racing heart. He offered thin excuses. A dead phone. A meeting that ran too long, but the shadows in his eyes told a darker story. And the faint bruise near his collar said more than his words did. After the shower stopped hissing and he climbed into bed, he whispered his thanks. Elena understood then that sometimes the most powerful thing we can do for another person is not to fix their world. It is simply to stay beside them in the dark. Where else would I be? Elena whispered. Roman pulled her closer and said he did not deserve her. Sleep gave them a brief refuge. But morning brought an empty bed and a note on the pillow. Back by 3. Stay inside. Please. Elena tried to distract herself in the busy lobby, drinking expensive coffee among strangers. Then her phone lit up with a message from an unknown number. It was Derek. He knew she was in Chicago. Worse, he sent a blurry photo of her taken from across the hotel lobby. Roman is a monster, the message warned. The past had not only found her, it was watching her. He ruins people, the screen said, and Elena's hands began to tremble. Then another message arrived, naming the hotel, the floor, and the dress she had worn the night before, even after she blocked the number. The warning lingered in her mind like smoke. Roman returned at exactly 3 and immediately sensed that something had changed. He found her sitting on the edge of the mattress, gripping her phone as if it were keeping her upright. When she told him Derek knew their location and had sent a photo, the room turned cold. The reality of Roman's world now stood between them. But so did another truth. Derek was no longer only jealous, he was dangerous. Roman took the phone. His eyes moved over the threat, and his expression hardened into stone. He is tracking you, he said, dangerously calm. He made a sharp call in Italian, issuing orders that sounded like surveillance. When he hung up, the rules had changed. She was not to leave his sight. Elena tried to argue that he was overreacting, but they both knew better. Following someone across state lines was not heartbreak. Sending photos from outside her hotel was a declaration of war. When she asked what she was supposed to do, Roman pulled her against his chest and made her battle his own. For the first time, Elena was too frightened to push him away. He made it my business when he targeted you, Roman said, each word heavy. Boundaries meant little to him when her safety was at risk. When Elena asked what he intended to do, his answer was chilling. Do not ask questions if you cannot live with the answers. She begged him to promise no one would get hurt. Roman could only give her a grim compromise. He would not take a life. But he would make Derek regret what he had done. Elena tried to speak of morality, but Roman cut the sermon short. In dark places, protecting someone you love can demand a harshness clean hands may never understand. Safety sometimes comes at a price. Then what am I supposed to do? Elena whispered. Just accept that you are going to hurt someone because of me. Roman did not flinch. Yes, because he hurt you first. She wanted to argue, but the truth was there. Derek had broken her down, stripped away her confidence, followed her to another city, and now watched her through a camera lens, like she was still something he owned. For years, she had buried the pain and pretended it did not matter. But ignored pain grows stronger in the dark. We cannot heal what we refuse to admit is wounded. When Roman told her, she had simply chosen to look away from his darkness. The realization hit her like a physical blow. I need some air, Elena said, her chest tightening. Roman offered to come with her, but she begged for a few minutes alone. Every instinct in him resisted, yet he nodded and told her to stay close. She left with the keycard clenched in her hand. Outside, the cool Chicago streets were crowded and bright, but the noise inside her head was louder. She was in love with a dangerous man, a man who answered threats with violence, and the worst part was that she did not fully want him to stop. When we have been starved for protection, even a dangerous flame can feel like shelter. But every soul must ask, what price are we willing to pay to feel safe? She passed laughing families and couples holding hands, people living simple lives she once thought she wanted. Now the idea of returning to her empty apartment felt like drowning slowly. Then the illusion of safety shattered. A man in a dark jacket was following her, matching her steps. Panic flared. She turned a corner, and he turned too. Her trembling fingers dialed Roman. He answered immediately. When she whispered that she was being followed and described the man, Roman ordered her to turn back toward the hotel. Then the man lifted his phone as if taking another picture. Terror rushed through Elena so hard she almost forgot how to breathe. The man closed the distance, matching her frantic pace. Roman's voice in her ear became a lifeline, telling her to stay where there was light and a crowd. She cut through a busy plaza, but she could feel the man's eyes on her back. Then she saw Roman moving through the crowd, his face carved from stone. He passed Elena without a word, grabbed the stalker, and dragged him into a dark alley. A muffled shout echoed, followed by silence. When Roman came back, his grip closed around Elena's wrist and he pulled her away. What did you do? She whispered. The answer was simple and terrible. Some people do not stop until they meet a force stronger than their cruelty. Did you hurt him? Elena asked. Roman said nothing. He kept his grip firm as they rushed back to the hotel and did not let go until they were alone in the elevator. I am handling this, he murmured, terrifyingly calm, rage burning beneath every word. Derek was about to learn what happened when someone crossed Roman's line. Elena looked at his hard face and saw the underworld figure everyone feared. What frightened her most was not only him. It was the dark part of herself that did not want him to stop. In our lowest moments, we sometimes want a monster to protect us from other monsters, forgetting that power always asks for something in return. Roman locked the door and immediately made another call. He paced by the window, ordering someone to find Derek's exact location. When he hung up, his harsh gaze softened at the sight of Elena trembling on the bed. I am sorry I scared you, he said. Elena admitted she was frightened, not because she believed he would hurt her, but because she had seen what he was capable of doing to others. Roman knelt before her and wrapped his warm hands around her cold ones, swearing he would never harm her. I know, she whispered, but I saw the other version of you. Her voice broke as she admitted that Derek had tormented her for years. and Roman had ended it in 5 minutes. A sharp, bitter laugh escaped her, carrying years of quiet endurance. She asked what that said about her. Roman reached for her, his voice soft enough to feel like shelter. He told her exhaustion was human after a lifetime of fear. Still, Elena felt torn. Accepting his protection meant coming close to the violence she hated. For years, she had worn the suffocating armor of the obedient woman Derek wanted, only to realize obedience had been a sell. Roman traced slow circles over her skin and reminded her of the woman who had grabbed his hand in a ballroom because she refused to be erased. She was real, he said, not perfect. Elena wanted to believe him more than she wanted to admit. Roman moved closer, offering himself as an anchor in her storm. He told her to remember who she had been before Derek dismantled her piece by piece. The question struck something deep in her, bringing back memories of dust-covered notebooks filled with stories she had hidden out of shame. Elena confessed that she wanted to write, to leave something behind that mattered. When Roman asked why she had stopped, she admitted her worst fear, that trying would prove Derek right, that she really was mediocre. Roman only smiled. Real achievement, he told her, belongs to those willing to make ugly mistakes first. Perfection was a ghost. The only true failure was refusing to begin. Growth requires messy drafts and painful missteps. Roman said Derek had torn her down because he was too cowardly to face his own emptiness. When Elena asked how he could be so sure, Roman pointed to his own dark past. His empire had been built on sacrifice, and standing still had always meant ruin. She argued that he had been fighting for physical survival. Roman told her that her quiet battle had been no less real. The realization washed over her coldly. She had survived Derek, but she had not been living. Existing is not the same as being alive. Life begins when we finally step toward the light we have spent years telling ourselves we do not deserve. Her voice was barely a whisper when she said she did not know where to start. Roman's answer was sharp. People often make the path complicated so they have an excuse not to walk it. The honesty stung, but she knew he was right. Fear had become her shield, and paralysis had become a choice. When she asked what came after failure, Roman's answer was simple: you try again. The real tragedy was never discovering what you could have become. Looking at this dangerous man who saw her so clearly, Elena asked how he understood her. A shadow crossed his face. He said he had spent his youth feeling invisible. That was why he recognized the look in her eyes. Elena tried to offer comfort, telling him that he mattered. Roman rejected it. The world feared him, he said, and fear was a hollow substitute for meaning. He wanted her to fear him too, thinking it would make leaving easier. Elena refused to let him hide inside that pattern. She challenged him to break it, to stop waiting for ruin to prove him right. When he insisted his world was too dark, she demanded from him the same bravery he demanded from her. Roman stayed guarded, protecting his trauma like a fortress. The hardest battle was not convincing others to love us. Sometimes it was convincing ourselves that we were not already too damaged to be loved. The silence in the room grew heavy. Roman warned that standing beside him meant stepping into a line of fire. In his world, he said, love and safety could not exist together. Elena did not move. She crossed her arms and told him she was choosing him, shadows included. When he said she did not understand the weight of that choice, she snapped back that she was a grown woman, not a child. She chose his damage and his danger. When he demanded to know why she would leap into the abyss, she spoke the truth she had been holding back. Because I love you. The words came out low, clear and impossible to take back. Roman stood frozen, staring at her as if she had spoken a language he had forgotten existed. When she begged him to say something, he whispered that she should not love a man like him. Elena refused to take it back. The choice had already been made. In 3 quick strides, Roman crossed the room and pulled her into a fierce kiss, all fear and longing colliding at once. With his forehead resting against hers, he admitted that he loved her too, and that he was terrified because he did not know how to keep her safe. They were a beautiful disaster, and Elena was not leaving. But outside that locked hotel room, Derek was still moving. Loving Roman was the first real thing Elena had felt in years. A sudden warmth in a world that had been cold for too long. Her confession broke Roman's armor. He held her as if she were his last connection to anything human, while the city lights flickered outside. But peace did not last. His phone buzzed, dragging the outside world back into the room. The name on the screen made his jaw tighten. Derek was back in New York. Worse, one of Roman's men had found proof that Derek had paid for Elena's phone records. Roman promised it would only be a warning, but they both knew better. Darkness cannot be avoided forever. Some storms have to be faced together. If Derek refused to listen, Roman said, the next warning would be impossible to ignore. The cold promise sent a shiver through Elena. She wanted to object to the violence, but deep down she knew avoidance had done nothing. Roman wanted to put her on a plane, to hide her somewhere safe while he handled the threat alone. Elena refused. If this fight was happening in her name, she would not be treated like something fragile. She demanded to stand beside him as an equal, not a liability. Love was not keeping someone in a gilded cage. It was standing with them against the wind, even when the truth was frightening. Roman hated the answer because he knew she meant it. Under the dim amber light, Roman shook his head, another wall rising between them. He said he could not bear for her to see the cruel machinery of his anger, the side of him that could step into Derek's space and extract silence. Elena was finished being shielded from reality. She asked whether he doubted her strength. Roman turned away, saying she should not have to carry his burdens. Her patience snapped. She was tired of being treated like porcelain. If he kept locking her away from the truth, maybe she did not belong in his life at all. Roman froze. Elena wanted the whole man, not a curated fantasy. True intimacy required both the light and the dark. Roman's voice went cold, armor sliding back into place. He asked what she wanted. Elena met his gaze and said she wanted him to let her in completely, even if the truth made her hate him. It was terrifying to demand honesty from someone who had survived by hiding. But Roman yielded. He grabbed his coat and gave her one condition. If things went wrong, she had to obey him. Hours later, they were on a plane to New York. Roman spoke in low Italian while Elena watched storm clouds gather outside the window. When they landed, freezing rain fell over the city, and a black sedan carried them into the shadows of the East Village. Neon blurred through rain-streaked windows as the sedan moved through the narrow streets. Roman gave Elena one final chance to turn back. Her hands trembled, but she refused. They stopped outside a decaying walk-up with peeling paint and cracked stone steps. Roman checked his messages, his face unreadable. He told Elena to stay in the car with his guard. Marco then stepped into the rain, inside the suffocating silence of the sedan. 10 minutes felt endless. Elena stared at a cracked third-floor window, her stomach twisting. Then a violent shout tore through the night. It was followed by the sound of glass breaking and a voice she recognized as Derek's. Night can swallow many sounds, but not the thin, sharp terror of a muffled scream spilling from an old brick building. In the parked car, Elena felt the cold of the door handle seep into her bones. In the rearview mirror, Marco met her eyes with a warning. He said her name softly, asking her to stay put. She cut him off. She was done being protected from her own life. Another crash sounded from above, followed by a heavy silence. Elena stepped into the damp air. Sometimes the hardest truth is that we cannot save people from the storms they create. Still, she climbed the stairs toward the thin slice of light where Roman's voice cut like ice. In the dusty hallway, Roman's voice was cold and final. He was setting terms, telling Derek to disappear from Elena's life completely. Derek tried to weaponize Roman's reputation, calling him a destroyer. But Roman saw through it. This was not love or concern. It was control. When Elena pushed the door open, the room revealed its ugliness. Roman stood steady and dominant, while Derek looked small on a ragged sofa. The table beside him lay a printed photo of Elena in Chicago. Roman's eyes flashed with anger when he saw her, but Elena ignored both men. She looked straight at her past and told Derek never to speak her name again. "We have been over for a very long time," Elena said, and the words cut cleanly through Derek's protests. He tried to claim Roman was manipulating her, but the irony was almost laughable. Elena told him the truth. It was Derek who had spent years chipping away at her worth. It was Derek who had followed her because he could not stand seeing her independent. It was Derek who had mistaken obsession for love. When he whispered that she had changed, she accepted it as her greatest victory. In the car, with Roman beside her, the adrenaline faded into exhaustion. Facing the ghost of your past is frightening, but sometimes you have to see how small it has become. Back at the apartment, Elena collapsed into the velvet cushions, her body aching from the confrontation she had delayed for too long. Roman sat beside her, his voice carrying a rare softness as he told her he was proud. For a moment, the words warmed her. Then he hesitated and revealed that he had purchased a prime corner storefront in the West Village for her cafe. It should have sounded like a dream. Instead, Elena felt a gilded cage closing around her. He had decided her future without asking her. "You bought it," she whispered, her heart sinking. Roman, trapped in his old patterns, looked genuinely confused by her retreat. He could not see the bars he had built. "That is not help. Roman, that is control," Elena said, standing as cold anger pushed through her fatigue. She explained that love was not ownership and not the right to dictate another person's destiny. Roman looked wounded. He said he had only wanted to show he believed in her. Elena shook her head. She did not want a benefactor to buy her dream. A dream built entirely by someone else no longer belonged to you. Love did not rescue a person from growth. It stood beside them while they did the growing. When Roman quietly said he had only wanted to fix things, Elena gave him the painful truth. She did not need to be fixed. She needed a partner. Under the amber streetlights, Elena asked him for the hardest thing a protector can give, the freedom to stumble. She needed to own her failures and victories because a life curated by someone else was only a performance. Roman stood before her, his entire worldview beginning to crack. He admitted he did not know how to love someone without trying to shield them from every storm. But love was not a rescue mission. It was a partnership. When he asked if she was leaving, the silence between them felt almost physical. She loved him deeply, but she would not live inside the beautiful prison of his protection. He could conquer empires, yet he did not know how to stand beside someone on equal ground. Elena urged him to let go of the fear that made him hold everything so tightly. He did not need to have every answer or carry every burden alone. After a long silence, Roman gave in. He agreed to cancel the offer on the storefront and admitted the choice had never been his to make. It was a small concession, but it mattered. Elena did not expect him to change overnight. She only needed him to try honestly. When they embraced, nothing was magically healed, but the honesty between them created a fragile new beginning. In the weeks that followed, however, that new space felt heavier than any fight. For a man defined by control, letting go was a slow and painful surrender. They fell into an agonizing rhythm. Roman struggled to imagine a role where he was not the architect of Elena's safety, while Elena tried to build her dream from nothing without running back into the warmth of his protection. To survive each other, they had to step apart. Elena threw herself into brutal cafe shifts and wrote business plans in the gray hours before dawn. Roman tried to dismantle the habits that had shaped his entire life. It was messy. He stumbled, micromanaged, and fought his own instincts. But growth is rarely clean. Sometimes building a new life begins with tearing down the walls that once kept us safe. Even with the ache of distance, they kept reaching for each other. Their messages and calls became careful, quieter than the storm of their beginning. One night, staring into the dark, Elena admitted how much she missed him. Roman admitted his loneliness too, but he defended the space between them. They had run so quickly into each other's arms that they had never learned whether they could walk together. Wanting love was easy. Becoming able to hold it was harder. Roman promised to wait, anchoring her from a distance. 2 months passed before Elena found a small, weathered storefront in Alphabet City, modest and imperfect, but filled with a soft, hopeful light. Signing the lease felt like stepping into a void. Elena began building her future piece by piece. She scraped old paint, hauled heavy furniture, and worked until her hands were raw. When her friend Maya said Roman would carry the weight gladly if she asked, Elena stood firm. She needed to know she could stand on her own foundation. When someone like Derek has spent years making you feel incapable, trusting anyone with your dream can be terrifying. Still, resilience did not mean refusing all help forever. It meant learning how to let someone carry one corner of the burden without handing them the wheel. Elena was not there yet, but she was learning. The trauma of a toxic relationship does not vanish because a good person appears. It lingers in the corners of the mind like dust. Maya climbed down from a ladder and told Elena a hard truth. She was punishing herself, as if suffering were the only way to prove her independence. The words pierced her. That evening, Elena sent Roman a message and invited him to see the space at noon. He arrived exactly on time, carrying coffee and pastries like a peace offering. At the threshold, he stopped and took in the beautiful, unpolished chaos. Mismatched chairs, half-finished walls, a hand-painted sign. He understood at once that this place was proof of her strength. Roman stepped inside and breathed a quiet word of admiration. Elena immediately began listing everything that was wrong: broken equipment, delayed permits, an unfinished menu. Roman gently cut through her panic. His eyes held a deep, wordless pride. In that moment, Elena understood something important. He had not laid the bricks, but his belief in her, during the darkest moments, had become part of the foundation. She told him the boundaries she had fought so hard to name. She did not want him to build her life for her, but she did need him beside her while she built it herself. When Roman asked how he could help, not command, she finally let herself cry. Roman promised to step back from authority. He wanted only the humble tasks: holding the ladder, lifting the heavy furniture, being present. Elena leaned into him and apologized for the distance, but he shook his head. She had not pushed him away. She had built the boundaries their love needed to survive. Boundaries were not walls meant to keep people out. They were gates that allowed two people to meet honestly, with a rare smile. Roman admitted the world had not ended when he let go of the reins. It was terrifying, but it was also freeing. Real love did not ask Elena to surrender herself. It simply gave her a place to rest when she was tired. The cafe became a canvas for their new kind of partnership. They worked together in a quiet rhythm of timber, shelves and heavy oak. Roman did not try to lead or correct. He anchored the shelves while Elena arranged her small universe. She placed the poetry near the window, so dead writers could catch the evening light. As the amber sun filled the room, the knot of anxiety in her chest began to loosen. When she whispered her fears, Roman did not rush to solve them. He reminded her that fear often meant she cared deeply. She did not need a savior to rebuild her. She needed someone willing to hold the lantern while she did the work. In the silence of that room, a new partnership began to take shape. It rejected the old myth of rescue and chose something quieter. Two people showing up, respecting each other's boundaries, and laying a foundation piece by piece. When Elena told Roman she loved him, she was not asking for a perfect romance. She was asking for the messy truth of two imperfect people choosing each other. 3 months later, her cafe, Between the Lines, opened in a storm of disasters. Broken machines, sold-out stock, ruined books, and pure exhaustion. Yet, through it all, Elena smiled. The things we build are rarely perfect. Their beauty often comes from the fact that they are real. Elena was exhausted, but pride held her upright. She had built this place with her own hands. When she turned the lock at 8 that evening, Roman stood in the shadows with flowers and a gentle smile he showed so rarely. He did not offer strategies or try to fix anything. He simply listened while she talked, letting her voice soften the edges of his chaotic world. In the reading nook, a hand-carved wooden sign carried a quiet warning: "The illusion of total control is the greatest trap." Roman stared at those words for a long time. Then Elena's phone buzzed. An unknown number had sent a single photo of the cafe's front window, taken from across the street. The message beneath it was short: "Enjoy it while it lasts." Elena's hands went cold. For one breath, all the noise of opening day disappeared. Roman stepped closer, his eyes already hardening. But Elena caught his wrist before he could call anyone. This had become the story between them, written in quiet moments and difficult choices. As the seasons shifted, the cafe became a harbor for tired souls looking for a place to belong. But that night reminded them the past could still find the door. Roman wanted to stand guard outside until morning. Elena wanted to pretend she was not afraid. Neither choice felt like freedom. So they locked the door together and went home in silence. One evening, in the soft glow of Elena's apartment, she looked at Roman with a fragile kind of nervousness. The apartment was small and worn, but it was hers, a space she had kept to preserve her sense of self. She told him she had finished writing their story. But the thought of publishing her vulnerabilities brought Derek's old criticisms back into her mind. What if she failed? What if he found a way to twist it into something ugly? Roman met her gaze like an anchor in rough water. He told her the only true failure would be staying hidden. Elena wanted to believe that. More than that. She wanted to prove it before fear talked her out of trying. Roman squeezed her hand gently and thanked her for holding on to her own worth. She had taught him that a person did not need to control every detail of life to matter. 6 months after her cafe opened, an email shattered Elena's quiet routine. A small publisher wanted her manuscript. Her hands shook as she called Roman, her voice breaking with disbelief and joy. For one long second, all she could do was cry. Then a second email arrived from an anonymous account. The subject line made her stomach drop. Before you celebrate. Attached were edited photos, old private messages, and cruel lies designed to make her look unstable, desperate, and dangerous to publish. Roman received the news without surprise, but his silence frightened her. He had only been waiting for the world to recognize what he had seen all along. Now someone was trying to bury it before it could breathe. Elena stared at the screen as years of Derek's voice came rushing back. The publisher called within the hour, polite but tense, asking if they should delay the announcement until the accusations were reviewed. That evening, Elena and Roman returned to the small Brooklyn restaurant where their paths had truly begun. But this time there was no soft nostalgia between them. Sitting in their old booth, Elena asked if he ever regretted choosing such a complicated road. Roman said the road was not the problem. Running from it was. Later in the fading amber of a quiet evening, Roman told Elena she made him want to become someone worthy of her. His voice carried the weight of confession, but his hand was already in his coat. Elena's chest tightened with old panic. Roman quickly reassured her and pulled out a small box. Inside was a silver key on a delicate chain. It was a key to his apartment. Not a demand, but an invitation. Then his phone lit up with a name neither of them expected to see again. Derek Heir. The message was simple. Tell her to withdraw the book, or everyone sees the rest. Elena held the key in one hand and the threat in the other, and understood the difference between shelter and hiding. Roman explained that love was never possession. It was showing up, offering trust, and knowing when to give the other person room to breathe. But now every instinct in him wanted to close his fist around the problem and crush it. As they walked through the cool Brooklyn night, Elena dreamed of growing her cafe, publishing her book, and finally living without looking over her shoulder. On the bridge, watching city lights dissolve into the dark river, Roman admitted that he had spent his life building walls that only kept him alone. This time, he would not build one around her. He would stand beside her while she decided. Elena looked at the water below and knew the choice was hers. Leaning against the cold railing, Elena felt clarity move through her. She had once believed love meant finding someone strong enough to rescue her and make the hard decisions. Now she understood that a rescuer could become another kind of cage. She would not withdraw the book. She would not let Derek turn shame into a leash again. Roman wanted to send his men, bury the files, and make Derek vanish from her life forever. Elena took his hand and said no, not because Derek deserved mercy, but because she deserved to win without becoming trapped inside someone else's revenge. The next morning, she called the publisher herself and told the truth before Derek could sell the lie. A year passed like a quiet breath, and Elena's book was finally published. But the final week before release nearly broke her. Derek leaked the edited photos on the morning of her launch event, expecting her to cancel. Instead, the cafe filled with familiar faces. Neighbors, readers, and people who had watched her build the place from nothing. Roman stood near the door, not as a weapon, but as a witness. When Elena stepped up to read the final chapter, her hands trembled. Then Maya placed the first printed copy in front of her, marked with sticky notes from real readers who had already loved it. Elena looked at the crowd, lifted her chin, and began. Roman clapped from the back of the room, his eyes bright with silent pride. Later, after the crowd left and the mismatched chairs were stacked away, they walked home through the cool night. The scandal had not destroyed her. If anything, Derek's cruelty had only made people listen more closely. In her apartment, Elena made tea while Roman studied a photo of the cafe on its chaotic opening day. She mentioned wanting a larger space one day, maybe with a quiet study where she could write. When she suggested he help her look, his expression changed. "Does that mean we are moving in together?" he asked. "Not yet," she said with a smile. "Maybe someday." When Elena said she wanted to do things right, she was asking for presence, not perfection. Roman pulled her close and whispered words that felt like a vow. In that quiet room, something finally settled inside her. The desperation that had once made her grab a stranger's arm at a wedding was gone. She stood firmly in her own life now, beside a man who had seen her wounds and chosen to stay. Derek had tried to shame her into silence, but the worst pieces of her past had not made her unlovable. They had made her honest. The right person did not erase every crack. They simply held steady while she learned which ones could let the light in. Roman no longer saw Elena as a ruin to rebuild. He saw her as something already standing. Love was never about finding a missing piece. It was about finding someone who could reflect your wholeness back to you when you were too tired to see it. Elena taught Roman that gripping tighter was not strength. Sometimes the real power came from opening his hand. 2 years passed. In a sunlit apartment, Elena wrote before the morning rush at the cafe. She had learned something essential. Life was not about flawless execution. It was about showing up again after the fear, after the humiliation, after the people who wanted you to disappear. Their lives began to overlap slowly, not with a crash, but like two rivers meeting. His coffee maker appeared on her counter. His books lined her shelves. His heavy coat hung by the door. Elena had room to write her second book while the cafe continued to thrive. Roman drew a sharp line between his cold business world and the warmth of home, learning to listen instead of command. They still argued. They still stumbled over boundaries and old fears, but their friction was no longer destructive. It was honest. Real closeness did not ask either of them to disappear. It asked two separate people to keep choosing the same direction, even when the road narrowed. Looking at them now, we can see what real partnership is meant to be. Not two broken halves trying to make one whole, but two complete people choosing the same path. No one is playing savior. Elena learned that she could not love Roman hard enough to cure his ghosts. Roman learned that protecting someone did not mean owning the battle. Together they built a life without the glossy perfection of a fairy tale, but with all the dirt and beauty of something real. Derek became a name they rarely said, not because he had vanished from history, but because he no longer had power over the room. What Elena and Roman found was rare, not because fate handed it to them, but because they chose the daily work of love. Their story was not truly defined by the loud, dramatic moments. It lived in the quiet decisions afterward. The phone call Roman did not make, the choice Elena made for herself, the nights they talked instead of running. Love was not a comfortable resting place or a perfect script. It was something they practiced. It was a choice they made when they woke up, even when old fear rattled the glass. Elena did not need someone to drag her from deep water. She needed someone who believed she could swim, and waited on the shore. Let us carry that image as the story fades. The love Elena and Roman built was never meant to fit neatly into a box. It became stronger because it accepted the mess. It looked straight at fear, damage and old shadows, and still refused to walk away. In a world that sells quick connection and easy endings, they chose each other slowly, deliberately, sunrise after sunrise. Maybe the simplest truth of their story is this: real joy is not luck. It is built in the choices no one applauds, in the mornings after the storm, in the hands that keep working. And when you find someone willing to hold the tools with you, that is where the magic begins.